Crypto Professor video on Ripio Credit Network, or RCN. RCN has been a long-term hold for me. I first bought the token back in 2019, and the token has existed since 2017. Now, RCN was really ahead of its time, debuting in 2017 with a decentralised network for lending and borrowing. Now, obviously, since 2020 has happened and the decentralised movement has taken off, this has become really commonplace for the majority of crypto investors to lend and borrow in a decentralised way. But the Ripio Credit Network was kind of the first step towards that with a decentralised environment in order to borrow and lend capital. Now, the entire project is a little bit sleepy at the moment, which is not necessarily a bad thing because it means that theoretically the token is undervalued. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of analysis on the actual price movement of the token towards the end of this video. But I just wanted to go through and talk a little bit about what I think the Ripio Credit Network could achieve if it is more widely adopted. And as I say, at the moment, it's a little bit sleepy in certain respects. So let's just have a look at the tokenomics overall. At the moment, we're around about 10 pence in sterling and around about 14 cents in US dollars. Currently ranked at 484 in the world and a market cap of around 50 million. This is kind of the sweet spot that I like to aim for with most of my investments is a market cap around this, because it means if it hits $1 billion, you're going to get around 20 times your capital. 24-hour trading volume is around about 1 million, so reasonably healthy and reasonably low volatility. Circulating supply is around half, 513 million tokens against a total supply of almost 1 billion tokens. So let's look at the overall performance of the token. We saw a large peak in late 2017, as we did with most cryptocurrencies, and then since then it's kind of tailed off. We're currently around about a quarter of the way back towards that all-time high, 74% down from that all-time high of almost 39 pence, probably about 50 cents back in January 2018, and obviously a long way off the low when the token was introduced in October 2017, over 3 years ago. Okay, so you might ask, what has happened to this project since it was initially developed? Well, actually, you can actually see that on the development. Okay, so this is the original white paper, which debuted in 2018, September 2018, and it basically describes what the point of the project is, its use case, as I say, very ahead of its time in terms of decentralized finance, and basically how anyone could sign up and lend their capital, which was over collateralized 200%, in order to help people who didn't have funds in a decentralized manner. Okay, and there's all sorts of discussion about how that works, how that operates, and even some examples provided as well as to how the system would actually work in various situations and under various conditions and circumstances. So all very thought out and all very considered in terms of how the use case could actually work in terms of a decentralized platform. Okay, now obviously when this platform debuted, people were a little bit more skeptical about decentralized finance, and it necessarily didn't have the traction that perhaps it deserved. Since then, it's kind of been, I suppose, superseded by other projects, but there have been recent updates which I think warrant additional attention to this token. It is an ERC20 token, Ethereum, but as you'll see later, they have recently migrated across to the Binance Smart Chain, which would mean lower fees. Okay, so let's look at the Binance research on this. A brief overview there. The core of the credit network is the RCN token. Okay, so it works a little bit like Nexo's token, I suppose, and you can pay fees using it, etc. And you get certain operational conditions. I think owning the RCN token is a necessary component of using the platform, whereas with other centralized or decentralized systems, you don't have to necessarily own the token in order to facilitate it. We can see that most of the owners here are making money, 78%. Okay, and most holders have been holding this for a long time, over 1 year. The price does correlate strongly with Bitcoin at 0.72, and we've seen, reasonable amount of transactions over the last couple of days. One thing that does slightly let the project down is the lack of posting, social media, etc. They do have a Twitter, they do have Reddit. Reddit is very sleepy. GitHub, as we'll see in a second, is a little bit more active, apart from on the actual development side itself. The Ripio organization seems to have a better impetus than not, and this is obviously the Reddit page, 1.2k members, but very, very old posts, effectively, over a year ago, there's not much going on in terms of discussion on Reddit at the moment. Now, the people involved, we can obviously see the developments on GitHub. Okay, reasonably active 5-6 months ago on the actual development side for the actual network itself. But if we branch up and we look at the actual Ripio International organization, we can see very active 3 hours ago, 6 hours ago, 6 hours ago, etc., etc. Very, very active development going on behind the scenes, at the higher level rather than on these specific instances. Now, if you read the white paper, you'll see that it mentions several people who have put their face and name to this project. However, if you dig it a little bit deeper, you'll notice that a lot of them no longer work for the project. There were 3 mentioned in the white paper. One doesn't appear to have a LinkedIn profile anymore, and the other 2 that are mentioned have since moved on to other organizations in the blockchain and crypto space. Okay, now this is not necessarily a good or bad thing. People leave and move on to different projects all the time, and from the GitHub we can actually see that there are now people still working on this project on a frequent basis. Okay, so it's just that people have moved on, and obviously the white paper is coming up to 3-4 years out of date, so you would expect people to move around in the industry. But obviously that means that there's credibility behind the project because they have since moved on to develop other things, and it's not just a kind of one-hit wonder. So the legacy of this project, I think, adds a little bit of value to it, as opposed to it being just a kind of flash in the pan, pump or dump situation. So let's actually look at the network itself. Okay, so this is the main site for the RCN network, and effectively it is a marketplace for lenders and borrowers to interact in a decentralized way, and the RCN token kind of originates all of that processing and all that networking. And as I say, it is an Ethereum based token, an ERC20 token, which is just migrated, or is in the process of migrating over to the Binance Smart Chain. If we actually go onto the main page itself, we can actually see that I actually launched the BSC chain here through MetaMask, and it does principally operate through MetaMask. So if I just click access the marketplace, now there's not a lot going on, presumably just because this is on the Binance side. I haven't actually looked at the Ethereum side, just because the fees involved potentially are going to be quite high at the moment. But if I go to lend, there's not a lot going on. But if I go to borrow, I can actually work out how much it would cost me to lend $1,000 of USDC. I can set the duration for 90 days, for example, and I can even set the interest rate that I'm willing to spend in order to get that. So 7% seems to be the default. You can even, which is a nice touch, pay back in installments. Okay, and that would mean that you pay obviously less interest, and installments are due every 15 days. So let's turn that off for a second. and you can post how long you want your offer to stay there. Now, if you go to create, it's going to bring up this MetaMask situation, which I need to fix because the gas limit is extremely high on there. But for now, I'm not going to actually go through with that. I'm just going to close that down. But it's a really nice interface, and this is actually a recent update that was in March 2021. We actually get a breakdown of how everything's going to work, and you even get your collateral calculated for you if you were to go to the next step, which I'm not going to do here. Okay. There are FAQs on the page itself, plenty of FAQs, so you can actually learn how the project works in the grand scheme of things. Over collateralization is obviously a must, 150% or higher, with an initial value of at least 200%. So you do have to over collateralize your loans. So if you are lending, that's a reassurance that things are going to go well if people don't pay. And obviously, if you're borrowing, that's something to consider. If you are looking to borrow something, you need to obviously over collateralize it. Okay. So it's one that's potentially going to grow over the course of the next few months. There is activity, okay, on the platform, albeit limited at the moment, and the interest rates seem relatively attractive. So it's something to explore, something to keep your eye on if you are interested in the space in the decentralized lending and borrowing area. Okay, and one thing to just keep an eye on over the course of the next few weeks and months. So let's look at the actual token itself, okay, and see where we are. I'm going to look at the token both in terms of the US dollar, which I said is around 14 cents, and in terms of Bitcoin. Okay, so this is the US dollar chart of all time, and I want to draw your attention in particular to this movement here, which if we extrapolate and if we assume the altcoin is going to break its all-time high around about 62 cents that was achieved on this very spectacular wick on the 2nd of January 2018, we should see the price climb to around about 75 cents. Now that would put the market capitalization at around about $750 million, which is around 15 times where we are now. So I consider that to be very possible and very appropriate for this if traction does increase and if the altcoin turns bullish. Okay. Now, at the moment, we are seeing limited activity in terms of bullishness, as I said. However, there's a huge level of resistance at around 18, 19 cents, which goes back all the way to April 2018. And if we stay underneath that, then that's going to be a significant area of resistance for us. However, if we break through that, then things start to look really good. 29.30 cents is a first suggested profit area, followed by 36 cents at a later stage, and obviously that matches up with previous liquidity zones overall. Okay, but as I say, I'm holding this token theoretically for the long run. I would like to see it climb to 60, 75 cents, 62 being a predominant first target, previous all-time high. But obviously if we break through that, as most altcoins do when they start their very bullish movements, 75 cents would be my primary target. So let's look now at Bitcoin price in Satoshi. Okay, now obviously we are very low here, naturally Bitcoin being as high as it is at the moment, $59,000 at the time of recording, and we're kind of hovering around the 250 Satoshi region. Okay, now obviously that is as low as it's been for quite a while. It's only been lower back in September 2019 when we had Bitcoin being extremely low valued, and then it took off and climbed to 1,200 Satoshi as recently as May 2020. Obviously that was in combination with Bitcoin being extremely volatile at that point, and since then, because obviously Bitcoin has been on a bull run, the price has depreciated to its current price, which is just off its recent low, around about 150 Satoshi. Okay, I would expect, and if I am able to zoom in here and actually demonstrate that we do see a little bit lower for this before we see higher. But if we were to see a breakout to the upside, I would recommend taking a profit somewhere between 1,500 Satoshi and 1,900 Satoshi, which actually matches up the previous liquidity zones if you see here. Okay, so I would expect there to be significant resistance before we reach 2,000 Satoshi. So taking profit of maybe 1850 would be entirely a good idea if we were to see a breakout in terms of this. So for example, Bitcoin could drop, in which case the token would rise, or the token could rise and Bitcoin could stay fairly static or stable, in which case I would take profit between 1,500 and 1,900, somewhere in that region. So let's zoom in. Let's see on a smaller scale what's going on here. Okay, now I've actually put the 200-day and 50-day EMAs on here, but I've done it in hours. So that's 4,800 hours and 1,200 hours. And we can see that we're currently resting on the 50-day EMA, okay, which is around the 241 region, okay, the 1,200 hours. We're actually slightly just touching it at the moment. If we break that, then we're going to see lower. We can potentially see a drop a little bit further. We are currently hovering around the 0.78 retrace of its most recent bullish movement up to around about 350 Satoshi as recently as the 30th of April. Now, obviously, we've got the 200-day EMA here being very static and actually acting as resistance at the moment. So if we do see any bullish movement, I would expect it to curtail around the 260 region. Okay, so effectively what I'm saying is I don't think this movement is finished quite yet. You could start dollar cost averaging here if you wanted to, because it's got the buy signal with the 0.78 retrace. But if I were to extrapolate that out a little bit further and choose my choose the lowest point here, as opposed to actually choosing the bottom of that wick, we can actually see that the price could capitulate down to 210 Satoshi. Okay, and given the lack of sentiment in this token at the moment, I would say dollar cost averaging in between here, so 240 and 215, would actually be very appropriate and risk managed. Now, obviously, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge difference if you are looking to make, you know, 5, 6, 7 times your capital. But I don't foresee a tremendous large movement in this token for the foreseeable before we see a little bit of a continuation of this negative pattern. Now, we have broken through 2 different types of trend line recently, this bullish trend line and this bearish trend line. I would expect maybe a retap of this in conjunction with seeing this fib hit, in which case that would be all that we'd need in order to get a buy signal. That also matches up with the RSI as well. So we should see a drop, a continuation of this into the RSI, into the negative 30 region, so below 30. And that's why I'm expecting a little bit of a further drop here before we see higher. And interestingly, if you look here on this other fib, we've got 213 here as well. So we should see this continue, maybe a retap of this red line, as I've said, and then we'll be off, starting to climb again with any luck. So let's look now at the actual dollar price, because obviously the dollar price is not at its low point. In actual fact, it's on an ascending trend line. We had a golden cross of the 200-day and the 50-day EMA back in early February, and since then it's been on a nice bullish trajectory. Okay, broke through this trend line and bounced off the 200-day EMA recently, and then made a swift recovery back above it. So that's a false break, and then has bounced off this trend line very nicely, confirming that again, and then ricocheted up here. Well, look once again. Okay, so we've got this further drop here to potentially, you know, 13 cents, high 12 cent region, 13.3 on the actual fib itself. So once again, I do expect a small sell-off here, and I emphasize the word small there. Okay, in the grand scheme of things, if you were to buy a relatively large number of coins here, you're getting a good price, because in the grand scheme of things, as I've already mentioned, we are quite low. Okay, so if you are liquidating some Bitcoin into this, you're getting a good price effectively, and if you're liquidating dollars on a longer term basis, the price could be cheaper, but then again it could be higher, and obviously we are in this bullish trend line at the moment, which we've actually just kind of broken through, and then I would expect this to act as resistance in the short term, but in the long term we would obviously have a nice big retrace back up to previous highs. Okay, so I'm looking for another situation where we see these lines interact potentially before we see higher, and also I would like to see this trend line supported, so showing support before we bounce here. So this kind of crossing area, these two trend lines here at 0.128 cents could actually be fairly pivotal. And obviously we are above both the 50-day and the 200-day EMA here, with obviously the 200-day EMA lagging significantly behind, which is kind of working as a stop loss, and the 50-day oscillating around here. Okay, so if you do want to get out, if you do want to set a stop loss of sorts on this trade, I'd recommend setting it at around about the 9-cent region at the moment. Okay, because if we do start to see a collapse in the price, then getting out here would be advantageous in the long term if we are to see the price of this token completely reverse. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that this project starts to come alive over the course of the next couple of months. As I say, it's been around since 2017. It's got a long legacy behind it. It's a little bit sleepy at the moment, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't really want to pick tokens that are center stage at the moment, and this could very much potentially be a center stage token for the future. It's got the development team still working on it. It's got, you know, a use case. The rates are quite attractive. And the usability is quite attractive as well. It's recently had several updates to its project. It's got a reasonable number of holders, a limited social presence, but otherwise it's healthy. And I genuinely think that it is a project that is worth some attention and holding some of for the future, albeit in a risk mitigated way. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any suggestions, please let me know on the comments below. But otherwise, as always, happy trading.